been widely traveled, and my brother and I keep competing on who's been in the most places.
She also said I had a nice butt.
Oh, Frank.
That's what you call the terrible twos.
I am very dedicated to my faith, and I try to live out the principles of that.
I went to New York because I had a good singing voice, baritone. But baritones were a dime a dozen in New York City.
Isn't this one of the ugliest things you've ever seen? And it was.
I was 2 years old when my parents brought me to this country, and we came by boat. My mother was seasick, so my father was in charge of a 2-year-old. And you know those terrible twos? All right. I got away from my father, and he was looking all over the ship for me. Finally, one of the officers came with me in tow back to my mom and dad. That's what you call the terrible twos.
My father was a poorly paid school teacher, and he always worked a couple other jobs to put bread on the table, you know, but we always had bread, and we even had German sausage.
Until I reached the age of 65, I played basketball. That was my popular sport. I was a guard, and I still had a quick first step, and I was able to intercept some passes, block some shots. So, but I love basketball. It was just a small farming community. We never got past the sectional.
I was a senior, Emily was a freshman, and I remember I had seen her in the halls at school. Never really gave her a second look.
Yeah. You never paid attention to me. Never.
Well, back then, seniors didn't date freshmen.
Right.
We really didn't get together, start dating until after we both got out of high school.
When I was in high school, I have dyslexia. Of course, back then it was like I was just dumb and lazy and didn't care. And so when it came to doing tests, I was never very good at tests because I usually true and false, and it's time test, and you don't know what you're reading, so you just kind of circle questions. And I taught myself to sew when I was in 4th grade, so by the time I got in high school, I was really sewing quite well. And the project that's supposed to take you all semester, I did in 2 weeks, and I would take patterns and find a dress that I liked and find material and make it for pennies compared to what the price was. And I was knitting a sweater if I didn't feel like sewing. And one year my high school home ec teacher's in-laws died, and she had to be gone for a week. So all the other sewing classes had study hall except my class, because I was to teach the class because I knew it was going on.
At the time, my maternal grandmother was living with us. I came home from the date. She said, "He's wonderful. He's just wonderful." And I thought, what is she talking about? She doesn't even know this guy.
She was very smart.
Yeah. And the thing she would always say, which we'll never forget, is she said, "He's so clean. He looks so clean." And I would say, "Well, yeah, Grandma, you know, he showers, he bathes." But for some reason, she always thought that was really something. I don't know. He was always clean.
You're leaving out one thing.
What?
She also said I had a nice butt.
Oh, Frank.
That's the truth.
That is the truth.
She was quite a lady. I met her on a weekend. We were married 5 weekends later. And we lived together for almost 62 years. So it was kind of love at first sight, you might say.
He was a city fireman for the city of Hammond, and then he was a paramedic. We met in high school, Hammond High School. and we're married in Hammond.
My husband wanted to have his own flower shop. I liked doing bookkeeping, so the joke in the family always was that he wanted his own flower shop and he needed a bookkeeper, and that's why he ended up proposing to me. And that's not the way he tells the story, but that's my version of it.
Well, when you take your marriage vows, just make sure you remember them. And anybody that tells you it's going to be an easy road is lying to you, because there's going to be bumps in the road. And love should be the motivating factor. If you don't love your mate, you should never get married.
I don't know, I just try and get through the real bad times, somehow try and work through it. Obviously, if you truly love each other, you'll make an honest attempt at doing that. You have to overlook other people's faults a lot. Yeah. And hopefully you teach your children to do the same thing.
When you're married, you cannot be selfish. You can't be selfish when you're married or when you have children. And you have to like the other person. You know, love is easy. Love really is easy. But liking the other person, that can be very difficult sometimes, you know. That can be real tough.
I don't believe there are only 7 wonders in the world. I think there are 8, and Herb is the 8th one. That was my husband's name.
My mother and dad had invited my future husband's parents for dinner. It was on a Sunday. And we were looking over samples of our wedding invitations, and Ken was already in the Navy. He just happened to turn on the radio, and the first thing that came over was Pearl Harbor had been bombed. Well, with that, Ken went to the telephone and called the recruiting station where he was stationed, and his superior officer told him to get down to the station immediately. So all our wedding arrangements were made by phone, and we were married on a Sunday afternoon. No honeymoon. We had to be back in Akron, Ohio, because Ken had to be in the recruiting station first thing Monday morning.
Our travels were all quite often in connection with where we lived and where we took vacations. So when we lived in Hong Kong, we went to Bali and Kashmir and Sri Lanka and Singapore and a few other places. And when we lived in Europe, we'd camped, and a lot of those pegs you see on our board there were places we'd been either for meetings or for camping. We went to Ethiopia, and I lived there 8.5 years. And in that place, I worked with Ethiopian women with nutrition and baby care, literacy and so forth. And our mission was very well accepted by Haile Selassie, the Emperor of Ethiopia. And we got to know the royal family quite well.
That's my, you might say, my banner of achievement in the. I'm past president of the Missouri Association and also the Western Association, and I was in the International Plant Propagators, and that's the plaque there that I wrote 2 papers for the society's what they call their proceedings. They had a whole, every year they publish a book and send it to all the members. And I left my collection with Powell Gardens, this outfit that I used to work with. It's a botanic garden near Kansas City.
I really enjoyed my children. Like, I didn't have my children easily. I adopted a child before I had 2 of my own, and I guess I just adored my children. All 3 of them graduated from college. And Dean is a nuclear engineer, and he works out of Chicago, and he designs all the lovely good things and changes in the nuclear plants when the government comes along and says new change. He does what he does, and he's out of town a lot. And my daughter is the one that passed away in December. She was a teacher, and she was very gifted. And she, at the present time, before she died, she was working in Arizona, and she worked with the Mexican children and the poor children that are coming over that need education. She would teach the Spanish children to speak, or Mexican children to speak Spanish. And then they gave her American children to teach them how to speak Spanish. Many of her little children were so poor out there. When they go to school, they have no shoes. They wear the same clothing day after day, and that kind of thing. My youngest son, he's had several jobs in Georgia. He's worked with the government and likes it very much down in Georgia. He married a Southern girl, and so I have a you-all kind of family down there. Enjoy it.
Watching my grandson be born was one of the happiest moments of my life. You know, the doctor said, one of the nurses came and said, you can't go in the room, but you can stand in the door. And I got to the door in time for him to come out. The doctor held him up and said, isn't this one of the ugliest things you've ever seen? And it was. And then he cleaned him up and held him back up, and he looked a lot better. But, you know, that was really happy. And I have a lot of happy memories with my family.
My son was born in 1950 in Long Island at Flushing Hospital. And then I didn't want to bring him up in New York City, so we moved back to Kansas City. And probably the proudest thing I am of is he inherited my voice, and he's used it beautifully. He and I sang in our first opera in the chorus 40 years ago.
My one son was joined ROTC, and of course he committed himself for 2 years to the Army. It's a frightening feeling, not knowing, especially when you don't get a letter and you're wondering if he's well. So you just live from one day to the next with the hope that everything's going well for them.
Vi Todesanung, dämring deckt die Lande, umhüllt das Tal mit schwärzlichem Gewande. Do you recognize this? It's the introduction to Evening Star from Tannhäuser.
We are in Iraq right now. My father was in the British Army in the First World War. I have a letter here that tells of where he is stationed. How it got through censorship, I will never know. But he was also in Baghdad, in Iraq, in the First World War. But it's amazing how history repeats itself. And don't we ever learn?
I would like to be remembered as actually achieving what I try to do, in that I try to be kind and thoughtful and helpful to other people, and that I am very dedicated to my faith, and I try to live out the principles of that.
My mother, in a very quiet way, taught me to respect others, to always be honest, to treat people obviously the way I want people to treat me. And that has stayed with me forever.
Not everything turns out the way we would want it to, but I think there's a reason for it, and there have been times when I could see what the reason was, that what I thought wasn't working out very well turned out to be very good indeed afterwards in the overall picture.
Be as personable as you can with all your friends and relatives. That's probably the best advice I can give.
The sky is the limit for those that have gotten their education and been very honest, hardworking, and dedicated to whatever they're doing. So I just feel that people that have a high moral compass and stick with it are really going to be rewarded with happiness in their marriages and in their careers both.